we're going to be looking at how backgrounds and borders don't really float the same way as other page elements. So this is a page that is similar to the pages that we've been working with. I've made a couple of slight changes to the page layout. Obviously, I've changed the background color of my H1 and my H3 tags so that they stick up, and added background colors to them instead of just an underline. And you can see how that's affecting the rest of the elements on the page. I also extended the call out box a little bit just to have some more text in there, because we're going to be going ahead and creating something that looks a little bit different utilizing that. So basically, this is a concern of web designers. If you have an image that has a background image or a border, so this would act the same way as if we had our border bottom or this background color, background image inserted here, and we float an element like this image or this call out box to the right, you can see how the image or the sidebar content does move up and it wraps just as it should, but the background color or border of the other image that it's basically set on top of is going to appear underneath. And you can see how this doesn't really help our design that much. It looks a little strange right there. So basically it is actually working the way it's supposed to. A web browser is wrapping the text around the float, but not around the border or the background. So when you have something where you want to have a background or a border image stop when it reaches the floated element, you can go ahead and use CSS to do that. Now, basically, we just need to add a rule into our XHTML. And before we do that, let's just take a quick look at our page so that you can see the changes that I've made. I have basically taken my callout div and I've actually pulled it above my H3 tag. Before it appeared below my H3 tag. And the reason that I did this is so that you could see how the background color of the H3 div is going behind this box right here. The other thing that I did was I made sure that my image was pulled outside of the H1 tag. Before, I believe it was located inside the H1 tag, so I just pulled it outside of the H1 tag. And then for the CSS, all I did was I just changed the on my H3 and my H1, I changed the color to white text, I changed the background color to green, and I added a little bit of padding to the top and the left and the bottom, so my text wasn't super tight to the background color of those two tags. So you can see that I have padding top, left, and bottom, and I did that for both the H3 and the H1 tag. And those are the only real changes that I did on my page. So now let's go ahead and address this issue of the background color showing behind our floated image. Basically, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and change that. We want to fix that problem, and we can do that very, very easily. All we're going to have to do basically is assign a simple style to our H1 tag. So I'm going to come here to my H1 and I'm going to actually assign the overflow property, and I'm going to go ahead and tell the overflow to be set to hidden. And I'll go ahead and I'll use this exact same thing on my H3 tag. So I'll come here to my H3 and I'll just paste that in. If I save this and if I refresh now, you're going to see how these work the way that they should. Now they basically stop to the left of the image or the call out bar. I have a little more spacing up here on the image because we set some margin spacing on the image that was more than what we have on our call out bar. We could adjust that with the CSS if we wanted to. But now you can basically see that by using this style or this rule, overflow hidden, the overflow property is going to make the background or the border that extends underneath the float disappear. So that's exactly what we wanted to do. Now let's kind of step back and talk about overflow property, because we haven't addressed that yet. So basically, how overflow usually works, this is kind of like a side bonus that you get for the overflow property. But how overflow usually works is when content is inside a styled tag, it's larger than the style defined width and height of that particular element, you can have some weird things happening. So we're going to go ahead and look at our callout box, and I'm going to go ahead and create a style down here on the callout box that is going to demonstrate what happens right here. So I'm simply going to go ahead and come to my callout box in my code view here, and here's my callout right here, and I'm going to go ahead and define a height. So I'll define a height, and let's just set the height to 250 pixels, same as our width. I'm going to save that, and if I refresh in the browser, you can see what happens here. The callout box did go ahead and accurately represented the height of the box, but the content that was inside of the box is now flowing outside of the box and over other text, and obviously it's making it so that it's completely unreadable. Depending on the browser that you're viewing this, some of the browser is going to let the content spill out of the box, like we're seeing right here. Other browsers, mainly IE6 and earlier, are just going to expand the box and ignore your height value. So basically you can control what a browser should do in this situation with the overflow property. Overflow allows you to input 4 keywords that control how the content overflows and how the edges of the box should be displayed. Your first keyword is going to be the visible option, which is what browsers normally do. So it's like setting, it's like not setting the property at all. So obviously we're not going to be using that one. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go ahead and type overflow. The next option is to set the overflow to scroll. And what scroll does is it's going to go ahead and let you add scroll bars. So this is kind of a cool feature because it kind of creates almost like an iframe, or kind of like the old school HTML frames that you may be familiar with if you have been coding for a while. But basically you can use this feature to scroll lots of content in a small amount of space. The downside of using the scroll keyword is that the scroll bars are going to always appear, whether the content is going to fit in the box or not. So if we came in here and reduce the content, and if I just come into my callout box here, and let's go ahead and let's just temporarily cut everything except for the first paragraph. So if I just cut that and save my page and we refresh, you can see, Firefox is actually getting rid of the scroll bars, but in many of the other browsers, the scroll bars will appear when you have the CSS property set to scroll. So you might want to avoid that, although Firefox does seem to be not cooperating with my example. But anyways, keep that in mind for other browsers, and you'll definitely want to check it in other browsers. So that's the way scroll usually works in most browsers. But if you come up here and you change your CSS to the, instead of scroll, to the auto property, so if I go ahead and set this to auto and I refresh my page, it's going to basically look the same way. You can see how it kind of got rid of that little bottom bar that was waiting in case I needed to scroll horizontally, which I didn't. Now it only is going to show this, and this should fix the problem on pretty much all the browsers. It's not going to add the scroll bars if they're not needed. It'll only show them if they're needed. So that definitely is a benefit, and that's the one that we'll be using for this exercise. The final value that you can input for overflow is hidden. And let me just show you what that does. So if I go ahead and refresh this with hidden, you can see how the scroll bars disappear, but it is cutting off some of my text. Hidden basically is going to hide any content that extends outside of the box. This can definitely be an option that could be a little dangerous, since some of your content could disappear from the page. It is something that you may use though for solving some of bugs that IE might have in certain situations. So we'll probably revisit the hidden overflow property later on. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and set this to auto, since that's doing exactly what I want to have happen here. I want the scroll bars to be there if they're necessary, and that's what this does. And now I have a nice little scroll box. I do want to push my scroll box down just a tad because it looks a little tight to this upper paragraph right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and set a margin top And I'll use margin top, of course, because it goes outside of the box, and I'm going to go ahead and just set that to 1em. And if I save my page and refresh it, you can see that now it just kind of pushes that down. But again, I don't get that background border that was on my H3 tag, and that's a result of us using the overflow property as well. Remember, we used that up here. We actually used the hidden property on our H3 and our H1 tags so that the background image or the background color or image is going to become hidden behind floated elements. So that kind of teaches you a little bit about overflow. We went ahead and tied this into how overflow is going to interact with floating elements, and now you know how to use overflow to create information where you can have like little scrolling boxes, which are definitely really useful. It's a great way to display information where you have a lot of information on the page, but you don't necessarily want it to take up a huge amount of content on the page. So you should find that to be pretty useful.